All right, let's do this. A deep dive on climate change. You want the latest science. Okay, we got you covered. Straight from the source. The IPCC's Climate Change 2023 Synthesis Report. No need to wade through all the technical jargon. We'll unpack the key takeaways for you, make it digestible, so you're totally in the loop on what's up with the planet.
Yeah, think of the IPCC like it's like the ultimate panel of doctors, right? The world's top scientists all coming together to give the planet a checkup. And let me tell you, this report, it's their diagnosis.
And I'm guessing they didn't hold back.
Not even a little bit. It's a lot to unpack, but the message is crystal clear. It's time we took this seriously.
Okay, so no sugarcoating. Let's start with the basics. How much warmer is the planet now compared to, say, a century ago? Just to give us a baseline.
So the report states that the global surface temperature has already risen by 1.1 degrees Celsius since the late 19th century.
1.1 degrees. Doesn't sound like a lot.
Right. You hear that and think, okay, so what? But you got to put it in perspective, right? Think about it. The difference between a mild spring day and a scorching summer scorcher, what is it? Often just a few degrees.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
Now imagine that shift happening across the entire planet. That's the scale of change we're talking about here.
That's kind of terrifying when you put it like that. And we're already seeing the effects firsthand, right? Last summer's heat waves were unlike anything I can remember, at least. Is the report saying those are directly linked to this warming?
Absolutely. Those heat waves, consider them a symptom of a planet running a fever. And it's not just the heat either. The report confirms a surge in extreme weather events across the board, more intense storms, heavier rainfall leading to, increased flooding, and those brutal droughts all happening way more often.
And they're all connected to that 1.1 degree increase.
All interconnected. This isn't some random coincidence. That 1.1 degrees, it's a big deal.
And I'm guessing these impacts aren't felt equally everywhere. I mean, the report talks about vulnerable communities being hit the hardest. What does that actually look like on the ground?
So picture this. A coastal village in Bangladesh, right on the edge. Sea levels are rising, and the very land they depend on for their livelihoods is literally vanishing beneath their feet.
That's just heartbreaking.
Or how about this? A rural community in sub-Saharan Africa grappling with prolonged droughts, making it near impossible to grow food. These aren't hypothetical situations, These are the realities for millions of people around the world, and the report is very clear. The people who have contributed the least to this problem, they're the ones bearing the brunt of the impacts.
A brutal reality check. It's a stark reminder that this isn't some distant threat. This is impacting people's lives right now. So, knowing what's at stake, what's being done, is there any good news here? What about adapting to these changes, especially for those most vulnerable?
Yeah, there is some good news, actually. Over 170 countries have incorporated, adaptation strategies into their climate policies. And we are seeing some really innovative solutions emerging.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
All right, so take drought-resistant crops.
Yeah.
This is giving farmers in drought-prone regions a fighting chance, to actually maintain their livelihoods. Pretty cool, right?
That's pretty amazing. It sounds like we're making progress. But is it enough? Is it enough to keep pace with how fast climate change is happening?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Adaptation is crucial, but it's only one part of the equation. We also need to drastically reduce those greenhouse gas emissions, to prevent things from getting even worse. It's like we can put a Band-Aid on the problem, but we got to fix the root cause too.
Right. Makes sense. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about mitigation. We hear a lot about the Paris Agreement. Is that actually making a difference in global emissions?
Yeah, so it's a step in the right direction, for sure. It's brought everyone together, fostered that international collaboration. And we're seeing countries making these ambitious pledges to curb their emissions. Plus, there's been huge progress in renewable energy technologies. The cost of solar and wind power has just plummeted in recent years.
Really? How much has it gone down?
Oh, it's dramatic. I think solar energy is like 85% cheaper than it was just a decade ago. It's becoming a viable option for more and more people, which is fantastic.
That's great news. So we're heading in the right direction.
We are, but, and this is a big but, there's a significant gap between what's been promised and what the science says is actually necessary to avoid the really, really bad stuff. We're talking about those catastrophic consequences. So yeah, we're on the right path, but we need to be moving a lot faster.
So we're making progress, which is great, but we can't get complacent. We need to kick things into high gear.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we get into solutions, I think it's important to understand the alternative, right? Like, what happens if we don't make these changes? Paint me a picture of the future if we fail to take swift and decisive action?
Okay, so imagine this. The planet's climate system, it's like a giant ship, right? Takes a long time to turn around. So even if we completely stopped all greenhouse gas emissions today, like slammed on the brakes, we're still in for some warming in the near future. That's just the inertia of the system.
So some future warming is unavoidable at this point.
Pretty much. It's already baked in no matter what we do.
Okay, so then the question becomes, how much warmer are we talking?
Mhm.
And what do those temperature increases actually mean for us, in the real world?
Yeah, and that's where these different emission scenarios outlined in the report come into play, right? So even under the most optimistic scenario, like we act decisively, we reach net zero emissions by the middle of the century, we're still likely to hit 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming in the near term.
So even with a best case scenario, we're still looking at those more severe impacts we talked about earlier. The extreme heat, the droughts, the flooding, all of that.
Exactly. And if we stay on our current course with emissions staying high, well, then we're talking about a significantly warmer world with, well, let's just say potentially catastrophic consequences. The report projects that under a high emission scenario, global sea levels could rise by an average of 1 meter by the end of the century. Just think about that for a second.
Oh,
1 meter. That's enough to displace millions of people living in coastal areas around the world.
that's a lot to process. So knowing how high the stakes are, what can we actually do about it? What needs to happen to get us on track to, a more sustainable and less terrifying future?
One of the most important concepts in the report is climate resilient development. This isn't just about reducing emissions, it's about changing how we live, how we function as a society. We have to transform our societies and economies to be more resilient, to be able to roll with the punches that climate change is going to throw at
So
us.
we adapt, but we also tackle the root causes.
Exactly. And that requires a complete overhaul of how we produce and consume energy, manufacture goods, design our cities, and manage our land. We're talking about systemic change across all sectors of society.
So it's about tackling these challenges head on, not just trying to adapt after the fact. But that sounds like a monumental task.
Yeah.
Can you break down exactly which sectors need to change and what these transformations might actually look like in practice?
It does feel like there's a silver lining here, right? If we're making these big changes, these systemic changes, are there benefits beyond just a cooler planet? What's the upside for actually taking on this challenge?
Oh, absolutely. There are some major co-benefits to climate action that we don't always talk about.
But like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so think about air quality. We shift away from fossil fuels, we see a huge decrease in air pollution. That means fewer respiratory illnesses, better overall public health, especially in those big cities.
Right, makes sense. And it's not just about breathing easier, right? Think about the economic opportunities. Investing in renewable energy, sustainable transportation, all those circular economy solutions, that has the potential to create millions of jobs all over the world.
So a healthier planet and a healthier economy. That's a win-win. Anything else?
Oh yeah, there's more. The report also highlights how all of this is good for food security. Think about it. Climate-smart agriculture. It can actually increase food production and make it more resilient to those climate impacts, the droughts and floods we talked about. And that is absolutely crucial as the global population continues to grow. We got to feed everybody.
Right, of course.
And we can't forget about biodiversity. Protecting ecosystems, restoring that degraded land. It's not just about mitigating climate change. It's about preserving the incredible diversity of life on Earth.
It's about recognizing that we're part of nature, not separate from it, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like tackling climate change, it's not just about, preventing disaster. It's about creating a world that's more equitable, more prosperous, more in balance. But I know there are still these tough questions. And the report itself, it talks about this rapidly closing window of opportunity. What does that actually mean for us?
It means the clock is ticking. Every year that we delay action, those consequences, they become more and more severe. It gets harder to turn things around. And we've already locked in a certain amount of warming. But the choices we make, like right now in the next decade, those choices are going to determine whether we can avoid the worst of it.
So every year we wait, the problem gets exponentially bigger. Those consequences get closer. It's like waiting until the last minute to study for a huge exam, except the stakes are infinitely higher.
That's a good way to put it. The stakes are incredibly high. This is about our future.
Okay, so given that sense of urgency, what's the most important message you hope people take away from this report?
I think it's that the future is not predetermined. We're not just along for the ride. We have agency. We have the power to shape the world we want to live in. Yes, the challenge is huge, But the report also offers hope. It highlights all these solutions that are already out there, ready to go, and it emphasizes that we have the knowledge, we have the tools, we have the capacity to create that more sustainable and equitable future. But we got to get to work.
I love that. We have the power to write our own future. We just have to choose to take action. This deep dive, it's been quite a journey. And honestly, we've only just scratched the surface of this incredibly important report. But for you, our listener, we hope this deep dive leaves you not just with a better understanding of the challenges, but with a sense of, possibility. Because embracing climate action, it's not just about avoiding the worst. It's about creating something so much better.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The future is unwritten. Let's write it together.
And there you have it, our deep dive into the IPCC's Climate Change 2023 Synthesis Report, or at least the key takeaways. It's a lot to process, but the main message is this: we have a choice to make. And the future, well, it depends on the choices we make today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.